Hey, and welcome, kids. Time for Conscious Embodiment with Dr. Michael Lennox. That's me. I'm here with Zoe.
Hello.
Hey, Zoe. We are coming at you for December 4th through 10th. It's a quiet week ahead. Not so much last week.
Yeah, I had folks literally texting me, I feel sad for no reason, or
Oh.
I'm feeling a little like I'm just feeling so many feelings right now. What's with the full moon?
Oh,
So
that's
last week started big.
funny. Oh, I'll get that. That your environment, people in your environment now know you know a little bit about astrology. And indeed,
Yeah.
yeah, last week was intense because not only was there a sort of a powerhouse of a full moon, it was squaring Saturn, which are now saying that today. I have a feeling I didn't talk about that last week, but I always have that feeling. I always feel like in the early days of the podcast, though, I'd be like, I didn't talk about that. Oh shit! And then I go listen. I was like, yes, you did.
Yeah.
I can't trust my memory. But anyway, last week was intense, partly because of the full moon square Saturn, and then Venus was doing a lot. She's doing some stuff this week that we're also going to talk about because we're going to follow Venus like a crazy person for at least another year. But it is absolutely a quieter week. So that means we're going to be bumping up against less new sensations that knock us on our ass or lift us up and help us flow, like less new. But sometimes when we go through something intense and then it stops, we feel the intensity after the fact from the absence of the stimulus. Like someone was talking about being shocked with an electric sort of, like current and feeling jittered by that. And then when it stops, your body is still, I cannot remember where this conversation was in my life, but somehow this conversation came up that when the stimulus stops, the body is flailing from the stimulus, even though it's absent. And that can happen on transitional days. Like in my daily astro alerts, I might say today's a transitional day, but it doesn't mean that nothing's happening. I used to call them quiet days, but I stopped calling them quiet because they were not quiet because of this phenomenon. You have a lot of bumpy energy and then it gets quiet and we're still bumping. And that might be something we feel in the week ahead. But time for a question first. I got a couple of questions about patterns in charts months ago that I've sort of been deferring off, and I'm going to start looking at those today with a question from Francesca, who says, "Dear Michael and Zoe, first of all, I want to express my deepest appreciation for your podcast that I love and wait for with excitement every week. Secondly, I would like to ask Michael on his view of the configuration known as the mystic rectangle, since it seems to me rather positive, since the struggle resulting from the double opposition is contained and, I presume, channeled by the trines and sextiles. If I may, I'd be curious also about the grand trine. Well, I don't know. We're going to stick with the mystic rectangle. Well, I can fit this in. If I may, I'd be curious about the grand trine, since I always argue with my mother, who believes it's a godsend, while I suspect it expresses a lack of incentives to act and a tendency to a certain degree of laziness, so to speak. My warmest wishes, Francesca."
Oh, I love that you're weighing in on a debate.
Yeah.
Like her and her mom are like, I know what's
Her and her
going
mom
on.
in a
And I
debate.
love
Well,
that we're
I will
bringing
definitely
you
have some
in.
things to say about this. So let me just start by talking about patterns in charts. There are patterns that show up sometimes if you take your first breath at a moment when 3 or 4 or more planets are making a shape in the sky. That can count as part of your consciousness. the planets will do something called splash and gather over time. So they'll gather in one area, and then like 9, 10, 12 months later, they're starting to spread around, and they'll spread around for a year, and then they'll gather back up. And all along the way, they are making these shapes that you might take your first breath in and have in the chart. So the mystic rectangle, that's when a rectangle, like literally a rectangle, is formed in the chart. So the geometry of, say, the 4 planets in any, you have to have at least 4, right, to make 4 corners of a rectangle. 2 of the planets in this shape are relating to each other in a 60-degree relationship, a sextile, and then they're both trining each other from the other corners, right? So listen, if you're not visual, close your eyes and follow these words unless you're driving. At any rate, why a pattern is powerful in a chart is that if you can imagine a shape in your mind's eye, and I flick one corner of that shape, like if I were holding up my cell phone and holding it sideways and it's a rectangle, and I were clicking one corner of the rectangle, you would, if you were looking at this, you would understand fundamentally that my touching of the one corner is also making geometrical contact with every other point in the shape. So if there are 4 planets in that shape, the moon will hit all 4 points on a single day by conjuncting one, sextiling another, opposing another, and trining the other, right? So that means that there's a way in which different planets that represent different aspects of your psyche are all activated at the same time periodically in a life by transiting planets and or the moon. So in the case of the mystic rectangle, sextiles imply productive energy, trines imply flow and ease between different energies that then harmonize. If you put together a consciousness that reflects lots of productive ways of interacting and lots of harmony and flow, you're going to have moments in your life when that mystic rectangle is triggered of ease, grace, the power to create, the idea that you might do something and feel supported by the universe, mystic rectangle. Now, the debate question was about a grand trine. And this is an interesting conversation for me because trines were typically always thought of as and taught as, air quotes, good. Like a trine means good things are going to happen. But that is not at all accurate. What trines imply is flow. So 2 planets who are relating to each other in the triangle, in the 120 degree angle, are both singing at the top of their lungs, but in harmony with each other. So if you have 3 of these in the chart, now you've got 3 aspects of your consciousness that just live in a sense of ease and flow. And trines being the most movement-oriented of geometries, grand trines can be thought of as vortexes for manifestation. In fact, when a grand trine happens up in the cosmos, I will talk about it in my daily astro alerts, and I'll describe it as a manifestation vortex because harmony and ease between different aspects of consciousness empower every aspect of consciousness that's participating in the trine. Now, what I had to learn over the last 30 years of being an astrologer is to transform my language of good to the language of flow, right? That trines mean flow. Because there are times when I will receive a trine energy from a transiting planet hitting a point in my chart, and I'm overwhelmed with too much energy, right? Because the flow means flow, and sometimes flow is just freaking overwhelming.
It's a big flow.
Yes. So to the debate between Francesca and her mom, it is accurate to say that when a trine is present, there's less effort needed to have a satisfying experience. Hence, Francesca can look at it and imagine her own moments of lack of incentive or what she might call laziness might be reflected by too much ease in the chart. Whereas her mother's saying, oh, it's a godsend because it means you have access to this great flowing energy.
Mhm.
Then you also have to add the notion of the element. Every grand trine is either going to be a fire trine, an earth trine, an air trine, or a water trine. And those are very different energies. And a fire trine would absolutely create a sense of movement and action, whereas a water trine might create in somebody an overwhelming emotionality that sometimes does diminish their sense of movement when that trine of water is being activated, right? So
Mhm.
one has to consider the planets involved, the signs involved, the elements of those signs before you make a declaration that a grand trine is a good or a bad thing. I would say that both Francesca and her mom are both wrong and both right. Okay? So that's how we solve the debate. You're both wrong, you're both right. Hopefully, for those of you who are able to follow along with the geometrical astro language in this, you got something out of it. And for those of you who had to just sit through this going, I don't know what he's talking about, I apologize. There is not so much to talk about this week, as I've already indicated. So there's going to be a short rest of the podcast today. But I will start by reminding you that we move into a week where Mercury is in his retrograde shadow. On the 25th of November, he started this period of time where he's going to go over territory that he will backtrack over when he turns and goes retrograde on December 13th. So that means all of this week, we are in this pay attention to whatever's happening from the neck up because you will be revisiting mode. When we get together next week to talk about next week's stuff in the pod episode, we will be talking about the fact that Mercury will be turning retrograde next week. So he doesn't turn around yet, but he's doing some stuff. You ought to pay attention. Things are going to come up. And again, the things you want to be clocking are the difficulties and the challenges because those are going to need some extra attention when Mercury turns around and hits them for the second time. So pay attention to everything. Keep a little journal as a day-to-day experience of what your communication experience is like. And then when the backward motion happens, you'll be much more prepared. So guess what? I think your friends might be calling you again or texting you this coming week because something happens today that's going to increase our emotionality quite a bit.
Ooh.
Venus is moving into Scorpio.
Oh,
Yes!
yeah.
You see, you know what that means even before you even know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Indeed. First of all, Scorpio is a water sign, having just talked about the elements and how different elements are.
Right.
Water element is emotional in nature. So Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are the water signs. And one could argue that Scorpio is the most intense. It's like weather water. Right? Cancer water is the water inside our bodies that come out when we cry in the form of tears. Pisces water is like the ocean. The middle water sign is Scorpio. That's like the weather, a tropical storm. So Venus moving into Scorpio is like the tropical stormness of Venus's experience. Venus is not happy here. This is a sign of what's called her detriment. What detriment means is the sign opposite the ruling sign. So Taurus is one of Venus's ruling signs. Scorpio is opposite of Taurus. So that is the technical reason why we say that Venus is in detriment in Scorpio. But as I like to do, I like to explain it archetypally so that it's understandable outside of like a rule that you might get taught when you learn astrology. Given that Scorpio is so emotionally tumultuous and it's Pluto's sign, which means it's the place where we first understand death. So you don't want to combine love and death in the same sort of archetypal soup, right? It's like Venus and Scorpio is like, I love you to death and I mean it.
No.
I mean, I'm being silly to make a point, right? I'm trying to be
Yeah.
funny, everybody. Please understand that. But it is perhaps the most emotionally tumultuous sign for the planet that rules the emotional body to be in. The Venus spends about 3.5 weeks in each sign when she's moving at her regular speed. So understand that we are going from a week where, though Venus was in her ruling sign, she was doing all sorts of permutations that had your phone blowing up last week, right? That was her crossing the South Node, getting us in touch with the past, in conjuncting Neptune, lifting the veil of what we weren't seeing. Squaring Pluto absolutely was like taken down into the, Persephone underworld experience, right? So
Mhm.
I would say that while Venus isn't doing anything this week nearly as challenging as last week's geometry, just by virtue of her being in this sign, we are put on notice that everything's going to feel more intense. And we want to meet that with a sense of grace to the extent that we're capable of being graceful when we are emotionally maybe triggered. Tomorrow, Venus will trine Saturn. That's good. Like, I like that. Trine means, remember, trine means flow and harmony, not good, air quotes. But if Venus now in Scorpio is going to take us to deep territory that may be unsettling, the fact that the first thing she does is bump into a meeting with Saturn where he just says, slow down, honey. You can feel all your feelings, but do it in a contained way, do it in a responsible way, do it in a way that you take what you're feeling and you turn it into explorations that will help you learn a thing or two about how you give and receive love. So the first half of this week could be very emotionally intense and in some ways stay that way for a couple of weeks. But look for some interesting lessons around how you are processing your emotions as the first couple of days of this week unfold, because the teacher is going to have something to say about how we are processing our feelings, how we are relating to others in intimacy. And since Venus rules money and Scorpio is the sign where we understand how to invest money and grow money, anybody with some financial considerations might have some interesting fears come up around money. But what's
Hmm.
also possible with a trine with Saturn is an added sense of fiscal responsibility could be quite natural as we move through the first part of this week. So again, it's pretty quiet this week. And as such, we might actually feel the impact of the third quarter moon that we happen to also be in today. This is one of the 4 pillars of every lunar cycle. And so this sounds like a good moment to just describe that to you guys a little bit. At every new moon, when the sun and the moon are together, we plant seeds of intention because we are aware of what we want with our sun consciousness, but the moon represents our unconscious, and that's the soil, right? The conscious awareness is not the soil or the water or the nutrition or the care of the seed that we plant. That's the moon. So when they're together, it's like, woohoo, conscious awareness knows what we want. Unconscious is right there, ready to receive the imprint of our desires. And so we call the new moon the alpha omega, the startup moment. The likelihood of new things beginning then is ripe. And we set intentions for what we desire in the lunar cycle ahead. We call it planting seeds of intention because the farming analogy, I think, works well to help people understand the creative process that every lunar cycle carries us through. And it starts with the intentions we set at the new moon. So remember, conscious awareness keeps the desire in that place where we know what it is, and the unconscious is where the seed is doing its thing or not doing its thing. So 1 week after the new moon, the sun and the moon are now at 90 degrees with each other. They're in a fight. Conscious awareness is saying, I want the thing I said I wanted a week ago. And the unconscious is going to say either fail or thrive. The seed is literally breaking. Now imagine you're the seed and you're breaking and a little seedling is shooting out of it and eventually that's going to become a plant. Yay. Except that ask the seed how it's feeling on the day of the first quarter moon. It's going to say, I'm dying because it is.
Mhm.
The seed is dying and becoming either the thing that thrives or the thing that fails. Now, we're not planting 30-day plants, right? It's not literal. And the intentions we usually set are long range and aren't just about the next 28 and a quarter days. So sometimes we just describe the archetypal makeup of the first quarter moon. And what I might say to you on that day, like it is today, because we're in it today, I'd be like, expect to have a little stress. Your conscious awareness will see what you want to do today, but the moon, where all the juice is at odds. It's saying no, it's saying something else. It's the wall and the floor arguing with each other, where the floor is the moon saying no, lie down, and the sun is the wall saying stand up, and they fight. 1 week later, the sun and the moon oppose each other. And now that moon, that unconscious rock in space, is brightly lit up with the reflection of the conscious awareness. And now we harvest the benefit. This is where we take what we've created and eat it, if you will. If it's a wheat berry, you grab the wheat berry and you're like, ooh, bread, I eat. Mwah. Harvest the benefit at the full moon. And then in the farming analogy, which I love, we leave the chaff behind. We don't take everything. We don't need the stick that the wheat berry was on the tip of. And we let that decompose and turn into nutrition for the next crop. That's why at every full moon, we talk about gratitude and release. What did we harvest? What are we leaving behind? 1 week after that, and a week before the next new moon, which is where we are today, we're at the third quarter moon. Again, a square. Conscious awareness knows what it wants, but the unconscious is in a completely different place and is arguing, so it's a moment of stress. But it's a different kind of stress than the first quarter moon, because the first quarter moon has the moon sort of behind the sun, catching up with it, passing through the square. So it's like, will the unconscious catch up? Maybe so, maybe not. But in the third quarter moon, now the unconscious is leading. It's not behind, it's in front of the sun. So that third quarter moon is like the demand to put out into the world the wisdom you've gained in the 3 weeks that preceded. In fact, in the 8-portion lunar cycle that has 8 segments, 4 that I haven't mentioned today because they're not part of the major 4 elements of new moon quarters, full and third quarter. The cycle that we go into immediately after the third quarter moon is called the disseminating moon. Disseminate means to put out into the world. So we are literally in this third quarter moon being charged with putting into the world and maybe being tested on stuff that we've recently learned. So not to overwhelm your friends and the texting of your phone. It's like the stuff that came up last week was post full moon. And so in this third quarter moon that's peaking today, and given the fact that Venus is changing signs today, and so the energy of the day is about deeper emotional intensity, then the third quarter moon might be about putting out into the world an easier experience of having all of the feelings in your heart that you have, let them be intense, but somehow manage to stay grounded and containing of those feelings so that they don't overwhelm you. They're just part of what you're experiencing, and you have the consciousness to hold all of the deep, tumultuous stuff that's rumbling below the surface. So, lighter week, not as intense. For any of you going through a particularly difficult narrative, that may make this week more bothersome than less, because we're sort of free to vibrate. Pay attention to how your feeling body is speaking to you, because over the next few days, we're getting used to a very different territory for the next 3.5 weeks. And understand that when we meet next week, we're talking about the next lunar cycle and Mercury's retrograde, and we'll talk all about it. And in the meantime, have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week, we have a Callin Dreamer from Dallas, Texas. Hey, Stephanie, what you dreaming?
Hey, so I had this dream that I had a fish tank, and I went with a friend to take it to the aquatic supply store. And the store was big, really busy, lots of people. And I took the fish tank over to kind of like this side room, which was like a service area. And when I took it there, I dropped it off and I looked at it on the table and I realized it looked really terrible. Like the water was dirty and cloudy. There was no decorations in it, no pretty rocks or anything. It was just a bunch of really ugly fish. They all looked the same. They were really big. They were all dark gray, looked a little bit like eels, just too big and too many for the tank. And so I was sitting there thinking like, gosh, how embarrassing. Like, this is really weird. My friend came back. She had bought a few things from the store and she had some fish food. And when I saw the fish food, I suddenly realized, I don't think I've ever fed these fish. I don't remember ever feeding them. I felt really terrible. So I grabbed a big handful of her fish food. I threw it in. I was thinking, I hope that's not too much fish food. They don't, explode or something, or, but it's been a long time since I've fed them. So I'm sitting there worrying about all this. And then the service guy comes over, and it's this old man. And he comes in and he looks at the tank and he's just like, I don't like this. I don't like the way these fish look. I don't like the way they're moving. I just don't think they're very healthy. And he said, I think you need to get a bigger tank and we need to change the water and stuff. So I went into the store to try to find a bigger tank. And the store was really strange. It had like really dramatic lighting. It was almost like a herpetarium at the zoo. And the fish tanks, even though they didn't have any fish in them or anything, they were kind of behind glass, as if they were on display in a zoo. And they were all very strange and some were very, very fancy. I picked out the most simple one I could find. I was doing math in my head, thinking about how much I was going to spend. My friend was like, I don't know if you need to spend the money. Right. I was like, no, I feel really bad about these fish. I'm going to go ahead and buy a bigger tank. So picked one out. Yes.
Splurge.
So I took it back over to the service room. And when I got there, the guy had taken all of the fish out of the tank and all of the water. And he had one of the fish on the table and it was wrapped up in kind of a white cloth. It almost looked like it was like at the hospital or something, And he's like, here, I want to show you something. Right. And he picked up the fish and he kind of opened up the cloth and he said, see, look, this one, she had babies at one point. She's never been taken care of. She's really not looking good. And the fish had like all these wounds all over it, like as if the babies had come out of all these different places. And I just felt terrible. I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't been taking care of these fish. Now she's injured. And not only that, but she's probably going to suffocate being out of the water. It just kept getting worse and worse. So I felt terrible and I was horribly embarrassed. And then I think that was the end of the dream. I must have woken up at that point.
Is this a recent dream?
Yes, about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, I love this. Okay, first of all, I'm going to break a little fourth wall-y thing here for not only you, Stephanie, and Zoe, but all of the listeners. I do not read the dream emails that come in, kind of deliberately, right? First of all, it's Zoe's job to decide which dreams come in, not mine, right? So it's I defer to Zoe for that. And I want to hear the dreams fresh, right? That's important. And I saw your email come in, Stephanie, and I almost sent a text to Zoe saying, I really like this dream. Can we get it on the podcast? And I just think it's wild that I did not do that. And Zoe reached out and got you on. And this just came in this last week. So I want to acknowledge this, that there's some forces working together to make this dream be this week's dream, right? And so I want to acknowledge that at least for me, because this is my podcast, right? So I'm having a living dream experience of recording this episode because of that, right? But I'm going to allow for that to amplify my sense of the importance of this dream, not only for you, but for the people who are listening, because that happens, right? If you tune into the podcast, then by divine appointment, you're going to hear something you need to hear. It's just for you if you've tuned in. And I think that's the case. So water is always going to represent both our unconscious and our emotionality. Everything that's not about what we're consciously aware of, which in dreamland could be thought of as land, is water, right? So water represents where the unconscious is, doing its thing. A fish tank suggests something very personal, right? Your water, right? Your fish tank isn't your neighbor's fish tank. It's just yours. So fish tank becomes then a symbol of something about how you are perceiving your own sort of inner life. Fish that swim in the water are like ideas that are below the surface. So they haven't sort of been born in us. We are not water dwellers. We are earth dwellers. So something that's underwater isn't accessible for us to put into life, right? Because it's underwater. But the symbol is they are the divine ideas that float on the inside of your psyche that are ready to be nurtured, fed, cared for, maybe harvested or put into different places. Like there's all kinds of things you could do with that fish if you've been paying attention to them. So this dream is about, oh my God, somehow I've not been honoring my own sacred ideas, the things that live inside me, that if I nurtured them and cared for them, they might turn into something wonderful, colorful, passionate, vibrant. But there's some aspect of this that says, well, we haven't been doing that. And in fact, it's all dirty. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be changed. And then you get some interesting help, right? Give me 3 adjectives to describe this friend that was with you in the dream. I'm assuming she's from your waking life.
No, actually, the friend didn't really have.
So she was a dream friend.
No, I really saw the serviceman, but not the friend. Yeah.
Okay, so the friend then is just a figure of the witness part, right? It's like a friendly part of you is guiding you to learn this piece of information, get this wisdom, right? So she's there, she counts, but she doesn't count for a lot, right? She's just, if she was someone you knew, we would behold her a little bit differently. Yes, this man, this older man in the store who's the service guy, he's a guide. He's a high-level guide. He even sort of shows you the impact. He's saying, look, honey, here's what it looks like when you don't trust your own ideas. They wither, they die. This doesn't look good. And what I love is that the immediate response is, oh, you just need a bigger tank. Like, it's really not a disaster. It's just like I'm reminded of the idea of, I'm a big personality, so I had a lot of experiences in my earlier life of being reflected back to me that I was too big for the room. And one of the things that I understood about that fundamentally was I needed a bigger room. Like it was never about getting smaller for the room I was in. It was always about, oh, I'm in the wrong room. This room is too small. And now I live in a pretty big room and I don't have that experience. How, Stephanie, does this dream interpretation remind you of an exploration that you're currently in?
Well, it's making me think so much about my career. I've for a few years now have been, trying to kind of get my ideas to make sense. I've been doing so much brainstorming and wanting to put something out there a little bit more and just haven't landed on it yet.
Great. So this dream then signals a shift in that exploration. Maybe we don't know what's around the corner that you're turning, but do you get that the dream is saying, the solution is I clean my tank and get a bigger tank. So you're right in solution. You're not actually even in problem. You're in solution in this dream.
Yeah.
Because there will be an ipso facto. Ipso facto, you'll have a bigger tank. The water will be clean. You'll be able to feed the fish because your friend has fish food.
Yeah.
Right? So if nothing else, she's the part of you that's ready to feed your own ideas. She's got the food.
Yeah.
So that's the most important thing I want to leave you with, Stephanie, is that to me, the dream is reflecting a positive shift in a direction of nurturing your own ideas more powerfully because your psyche said, there's an inner expansiveness we're asking you to embody. And I think the dream isn't saying that you don't have the bigger tank. You're 30 seconds away from having that bigger tank. You're right there in the store ready to buy. And I'm guessing that if the dream had a second act, you'd be driving home with a fish tank in your backseat.
Yeah, love it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad this dream came to my attention.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.